Hello and welcome to British English with Alexandre. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Today we're going to be talking about Unit 38 out of 100, expected 100 units of advanced British English grammar. Okay, before we get started, please, I'd like to invite you to subscribe to the channel, share the content, so we can help English learners all over the world to improve their fluency. Okay, without any further ado, let's get started. Today we're talking about reporting what people say using nouns and adjectives. Okay, let's get started. Firstly, we're starting with reporting using nouns. We sometimes report people's words and thoughts using a noun in the reporting clause, followed by a reported clause beginning with that, a to infinitive or W8 word. Most of these nouns are related to reporting verbs. For example, acknowledgement. This is a noun. It comes from the verb to acknowledge, or even statement from the verb to state, etc. Note that when we report using nouns and adjectives, the exact original words are not necessarily reported. Instead, we might use our own words, or report that something was said without reporting what was said. So we've got noun plus that clause. For example, the claim is often made that smoking causes heart disease. So the claim is the noun, the claim, and then we've got the that clause. The claim is often made that what? The claim is often made that smoking causes heart disease. Heart disease. So we've got the noun and then that clause. Again, the jury came to the conclusion. It comes from the verb to conclude. So we've got conclusion. The jury came to the conclusion that the one was guilty. This is the that clause. The jury came to the conclusion that the woman was guilty. So conclusion is the noun that comes from the verb to conclude. And the claim from the verb to claim. The claim, this is the noun. The noun comes from the verb, and we've got that clause. We can use that pattern with the following with the following nouns. Nouns that come from the verb, of course. Acknowledgement, advice, allegation, announcement, answer, argument, comment, decision, explanation, forecast, guarantee, indication, observation, promise, recommendation, reply, speculation, statement, suggestion, threat, warning. All of those are nouns. They come from the verb, and we use those nouns followed by a that clause in that pattern. Now that we don't usually leave out that in sentences like these, like this. Now another pattern we've got here. Noun plus to infinitive clause. So we've got noun plus that clause, and now we've got noun plus to infinitive clause. For example, I accepted Louisa's invitation to visit her in Rome. This is the to infinitive clause. To infinitive clause. I accepted Louisa's invitation to visit her in Rome. I accepted Louisa's invitation. This is a noun from Louisa. Invitation. Louisa's invitation to visit her in Rome. Or even, he gave me every encouragement to take up painting again. This is the to infinitive clause. He gave me every encouragement. This is the noun, a noun, but in that pattern we don't use a that clause, we're using a to infinitive clause. He gave me every encouragement. It comes from the verb to encourage, and it becomes encouragement. This is the noun. He gave me every encouragement to take up painting again, to start painting again, to start making that activity of painting. Or in the previous example, I accepted Louisa's invitation to visit her in Rome. I accepted Louisa's invitation. Invitation is a noun that comes from the verb to invite. I accepted Louisa's invitation to visit her in Rome. Okay, moving on. We can use that pattern with the verb, with the nouns. Decision, instruction, order, promise, recommendation, refusal, threat, and warning. Note that some of these nouns can be followed by a that clause. For example, they carried out their threat to dismiss workers on strike. So we've got the to infinitive clause here. They carried out their threat. Threat is the noun from the verb to threaten. Threat. They carried out their threat to dismiss workers on strike. Or we can say, instead of a to infinitive clause, we can use a that clause. For example, they carried out that threat. They carried out that threat that they would dismiss workers on strike. That they would dismiss workers on strike. Another example here, another pattern actually. We've got here now plus WH clause. One raised the question of when the money would be collected. Of when. One raised the question of when. WH clause. We've got the WH clause here. One raised the question of one raised the question of when the money would be collected. One raised the question of when the money would be collected. We've got a WH clause here after the noun question. Question is a noun. One raised the question of when the money would be collected. Or even our previous meeting looked at the issue of how to increase income. This is a WH clause. Our previous meeting looked at the issue of how to increase income. Our previous meeting looked at the issue of how to increase income. So we've got a WH clause. We can use that pattern with the nouns explanation, discussion, and problem. We usually use of after these nouns in reporting. In that case here, for example, our previous meeting looked at the issue of how to increase income. So just to make a brief, we've got now plus that clause. We've got now plus to infinitive clause, and we've got now plus WH clause. Now moving on to section B. After many of the nouns listed in section A, we can use us to plus WH clause or us to plus WH word plus to infinitive to introduce the subject of a question or topic discussed or thought about. Note that an alternative preposition can usually be used instead of us to. For example, she asked my advice as to what subject she should study at university. She asked my advice as to what subject she should study at university. Or she asked my advice on what subject she should study at university. So we can use as to, or we can use on, advice as to what, or advice on what subject she should study at university. Another example, there was some discussion as to whether the price included the tax or not. There was some discussion as to whether the price included the tax or not. Or there was some discussion of whether the price included the tax or not. Another example, before we left, we gave them strict instructions as to how to cook it. Before we left, we gave them strict instructions as to how to cook it. Or before we left, we gave them strict instructions about how to cook it, Okay, moving on. Now we're considering adjectives instead of nouns. We can report using adjectives. Some adjectives used to report a speaker's feelings or opinion are followed by a that clause. For example, the builders are certain that they will be finished by the end of next week. So again, we've got that clause, but we're following an adjective instead of a noun. The builders are certain. They're certain about what? That they'll be finished by the end of next week. We can also use that pattern with the following adjectives: adamant, determined, agreed, angry, annoyed, grateful, insistent, sure. Adjectives expressing uncertain are usually followed by a WH clause. So we've got here, for example, scientists aren't sure where the remains of the satellite will land. Scientists aren't sure where the remains of the satellite will land. Also, we can use with the adjectives doubtful, usually plus whether, doubtful whether, uncertain, not certain, and unsure. Some adjectives are usually followed by a preposition plus noun phrase. For example, today's newspapers are very critical of the president's decision to appoint Mr. Walters. Today's newspapers are very critical of the president's decision to appoint Mr. Walters. We can use that pattern with the following adjectives: apologetic, complimentary, insulting, tactful plus about, dismissive, scornful of, abusive, and sympathetic to or sympathetic towards. Okay, and that brings us to the end of that lesson. I hope you've enjoyed it. Please, I'd like to invite you to subscribe to this channel. Share the content with your friends all over the world so we can improve your English by helping English learners to read fluency, increase their vocabulary and stuff. That's it for today. I hope you've enjoyed it. Subscribe to the channel and enjoy the content. Cheers.